Hello, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Andrade, and I am here today to read two fables to you and talk to you about some of the things we've been working on with fables. So today we're going to read two fables by Aesop, and you know that he's a famous fable writer. One is called The Fox and the Goat, and the other is called The Wolf and the Crane. Fables are stories that are written to teach a lesson. Fables have animals as main characters, and they usually have an outdoor setting. There's always a wise and a foolish character, and they also teach you something. The character learns something, and we learn something as the big idea. So this week our skill is going to be comparing and contrasting two or more versions of the same story. Comparing tells us what is similar, and contrasting tells us what is different. So depending on the author, the story can change. Remember, we learned about how fables can be written differently when we were reading about Anansi in different areas of the world. And it could be teaching you the same lesson, but the animals may be different, or the things they're doing might be a little bit different. So the first story I'm going to read for you is called The Fox and the Goat. And when you get to the next slide, you're going to be able to hear me reading that story. But when I want you to notice some things on our chart. And I posted our chart here on the slide so you're able to see, just like we were at school and we would have the chart at the carpet, this is the chart you're going to pay attention to while you're listening to me read. So what the skill we're working on is comparing and contrasting two versions of the same story. How are we going to do that? Well, there are 5 steps. Step number 1, you are going to notice details about the order of events in 2 or more versions of the story. So I want you to pay attention to the order of events that are happening in the stories and how they are different and how they are the same in those stories. Step number 2 is you are going to notice details about the conflict, and remember, conflict means the problem, and the resolution in the 2 versions of the story. Step number 3, you are going to notice details about the settings. Remember settings in our story chart? You're going to notice the differences in the settings in the 2 stories. And then step number 4, you can use something like a Venn diagram or a story chart to compare how they are the same. And step number 5, contrast how they are different. And then we're going to look at the lessons that both animals learned in the stories and talk about how those are different and the same too. So why do we do this as good readers? Well, we do this so we can understand the impact of an author. So I just want to remind you, what skill are we focusing on today? We are focusing on comparing and contrasting. And comparing and contrasting tells us what's different and similar in the story. I also want you to pay attention to the lesson. And lesson we figure out by noticing these details about how the character thinks, feels, and the motivations in the 2 different stories. I also want you to pay attention to the conflict and resolution, because that's going to give you some clues. So as you go to the next slide, you're going to hear 2 stories. So make sure you listen to both of them, because there's going to be some writing that you're going to do after. All right, ready for the next one?